Welcome to Thank You for Your Service, Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. My name is Tom Heiser, and I will again be your host. Today we'll be talking with retired U.S. Navy and Vietnam veteran Bill Haack. Bill, thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Tom. Same to you.
Okay, thank you. Get to know you a little bit. Where are you from?
Right here in Wisconsin Rapids. I was born and raised here, put my time in the Navy, worked down Great Lakes, retired, and now I'm home.
Okay. So you went to school here?
Yes.
Grade school?
Grade school, high school.
What grade school did you go to?
I went to Meade. Well, I went to Lowell first, which no longer exists. I went to Meade and then on to Lincoln.
Okay. So, any college?
Yeah, a little bit at Gateway and down in Kenosha, and also Mid-State Tech here, just a community college.
So 2-year colleges?
Yes.
Okay. So, enlisted or drafted?
Oh, I enlisted. I enlisted when I was 4 days past my 17th birthday.
Okay. Why the Navy?
Well, I guess because that was the first recruiting station I came to. No, I'd always wanted to be in the Navy. At the time I was living in Milwaukee. And you go down Friday evening down Wisconsin Avenue in Milwaukee, and you saw the sailors walking down there and had a young lady on either arm. I said, boy, that's for me right there. It was just, it was a Navy town. You had kids from Great Lakes coming up there, and Navy was all around, so I picked the Navy.
Any other family members that were in service or in the Navy? Or?
I had an uncle that was in the Armed Guard in World War II. We had 3 ships sunk out, and then one of them limped back into Boston Harbor. I have another uncle who was in the Army in World War II. I had another uncle in the Marine Corps in World War II. My stepdad was in the Army in World War II. And a cousin who was 28 years in the Air Force.
So a lot of military service in your family.
Yep. And that carried on too, by the way. I got 2 sons. One of them put 26 years in the Navy, and the other put 22 years in the Army. So there's a few years there in that family.
Okay. So you said just shy of your 17th birthday.
Yes.
So somebody had a sign for you.
Oh yeah, my mother, she couldn't wait to get me out of the house. So she said, "Are you going yet?" No, not really. I talked her into signing for me. I was not what you'd call a scholarly type in high school. I just barely skated by, so I couldn't wait to get out of school, go into service.
So you were in Rapids at the time?
I was in Milwaukee at the time. I was down there. Well, actually, my mother and stepdad had moved to Milwaukee, and about a month before that, and I was at South Division High School there, and it was kind of a rough school, and I was disillusioned with school anyway at the time. So you know how it is. You thought you were smarter than the other people in the school, but I never was.
So other than the a girl in every port and so many people in the military, so you just decided to enlist in the Navy?
Yeah, well, you see a lot of movies and stuff, and of course it's not quite that laid back at sea and stuff. You're working pretty much, but I always wanted to go to sea. I always wanted to go overseas. And at the time, the Navy offered the best opportunity for that. Because, we were just sending advisors to Vietnam. Who knew it was going to end up the way it was? But, I figured, well, if I'm going to see anything other than downtown Milwaukee and downtown Wisconsin Rapids, I better join the Navy.
So what year was that?
That was 1962, March the 6th, 1962.
Okay. Any friends go in with you?
Yeah, as a kid I went to school with, his name was Rolly Rick. Roland is what his name, Rolly Rick, and we joined under the buddy program. Well, Rolly had been in a car accident, probably 10, 12 years old, something like that, and he had busted a couple of ribs, and you could see where the ribs had been allowed to heal, and it was like a big lump right there. It never bothered him, according to him. So he passed the physical. We went in. The second night we were there, they picked Roley for what they call a working party to swab the floors, and he said, no, he says, my chest is hurting me, and 2 weeks later he was out of the Navy. So that was my experience with the buddy program.
He was out and you weren't.
I wasn't, not at all.
Okay. What did you envision it to be?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I envisioned going to sea, and the first night was a waker-upper. I couldn't get to sleep, you know, your first night and you're in a new place and all these strangers, and I couldn't get to sleep. And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, here comes the chief petty officer with a baseball bat and a 55-gallon trash can, waking everybody up with that baseball bat rolling around. I said, oh man, what have I got myself into?
Okay, so you go to Milwaukee and take your physical,
Correct?
and they put you on a bus.
Yeah, no, as a matter of fact, we took, if you remember, if you were ever in Milwaukee in the 60s, the North Shore train, little, it's almost like a city, not cable car, but streetcar. And it would run down between Milwaukee and Chicago, and it stopped right outside the base at Great Lakes. And that's where my Navy career started.
Okay, so you get off the little transport vehicle,
Okay.
and nervous?
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. So you know, I mean, I didn't know. I had no idea what boot camp was going to be like. I knew a couple of sailors that, you know, hang around in our neighborhood and stuff, and nobody ever told me what boot camp was like. So yeah, I was kind of culture shocked there, you know.
Apprehensive.
Yes.
Okay. So now boot camp starts.
Okay. And the trash can and the chief.
And the chief.
And then I had, let's see, I think we went 11 weeks at that time, and two of the weeks were what they call service week. You're right in between phase. There's 3 phases of boot camp: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You're right in between 2 and 3, and you have 2 weeks of service week. That's where you go mess cooking, or you do things that normally a sailor would do. You're interrupting your training there, and then you go back, and your last 3 weeks is your all tests. And I said, you know, I thought I'd gotten away from school, but it wasn't.
When you enlisted, what did you enlist for? What job were you?
I just enlisted. I didn't care where they sent me. They picked me to be a cook first off, and I didn't want to be no cook. So I just enlisted, and I ended up as what we call a deck ape. I was just a plain seaman that worked on the deck for us, chipping paint and painting and wire brushing and all the little jobs that nobody else wanted to do.
And you didn't have the rank to get out of it.
That's right. I was, well, back then you went, when you were E1, of course, in boot camp, and the day you graduated boot camp, you were an E2. So, you know, I mean, that, yeah, I'm way up there now. I'm 1 pay grade above.
Okay. Boot camp, what you went through, was it tough?
It wasn't tough. It was challenging in the respect, like, well, I'd never done any of that before, you know, like 16 count manual, 96 count manual. And it took a little while to adjust, you know. I was still a street kid from Milwaukee, so, you know, I was going to square away the Navy. Well, it didn't work that way. They squared me away instead.
Making any friends in boot camp?
Yeah, I got a real good friend of mine from Indiana, Evansville, Indiana. Bob Schweckert was his name. I still remember him to this day. Him and I kind of hit it off right away, and we'd take our smoke breaks together, and, you know, just, and then come boot camp graduation. Of course, my folks were coming down from Milwaukee, so there was no problem. As a matter of fact, we went on boot camp Liberty in Milwaukee. And then Bob's folks were getting a divorce at the time, so my folks kind of adopted him, and everywhere we went, we took him with us. And unfortunately, it was the last time I ever seen him, was the day we graduated boot camp.
Okay, so being a career Navy guy, did you ever run into anybody else that you went through boot camp with?
No, well, yes, in one respect I did. I ran into the chief, the one who was our boot pusher. And it was my second enlistment. I was second class, and all of a sudden I look at this name I was standing the quarterdeck watch, and there was a list of sailors who were due to report. And I saw this Engineman Chief John Poissant. I said, gee, that name is familiar. Sure enough, here he comes aboard, and that was my company commander in boot camp. That was the only one, though. I never, I don't think too many guys stayed in because that was a sign of the times back then, you know.
So now you're done with boot camp, and they're going to send you to an advanced individual training, correct?
No, I didn't get any advanced training. If I'd accepted the job as a cook, they would have sent me to commissaryman school. But at that time, it was only like a 2 or 3 week on-the-job training thing, and then off you go to the ship. But I said, no, I didn't want to be a cook, so they said, okay, you're going on deck for us. So I went straight to a ship on my first enlistment. I went to a troop transport out of San Diego, California. 400 sailors and 1,500 Marines. That was my first experience with shipboard life.
So troop transport, West Coast.
West Coast.
Where are they taking them?
Well, I'll tell you the story behind that a little bit. I reported on a Monday, I believe it was a Monday or Tuesday, and got my first liberty. You got 2 days of in-dock where they take you all around the ship and show you who's who and what's what. And then I got my first liberty on Friday. So I go ashore, and this kid from Los Angeles named Poissant, no, that was Pouncey was his name. And he's showing me the sights of San Diego. We're going to USO and all the other places. I forget where, we came back about 11 o'clock at night, and we noticed there was a lot of activity on the pier. And we looked, and now normally, like I say, we didn't carry 1,500 Marines on a daily basis, only when we deployed. Well, there was a whole bunch of buses at the head of the pier, and it was filled with 1,500 Marines, and we were not scheduled for any kind of deployment. Saturday morning, those 1,500 got off the buses, filtered onto the ship. Saturday afternoon, we were on our way for Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So that was our first one.
So that's on the West Coast.
On the West Coast.
Panama Canal.
A lot of West Coast troop transport and cargo transport ships went there. Matter of fact, I don't think there were any troop transports off the East Coast that even went. They were all deployed in the Mediterranean at the time.
So now your first job with a ship
Was a mess cook. And you know, mess cooking is really not that bad on some ships. You get up early and you go to bed early and you work hard during the day, but it's really not that bad because on most ships you got a crew 400 or 500, and that's all you got to worry about. On this ship, you had a crew of 430, something like that, and 1,500 Marines. So you go to work at 3:30 in the morning because they start serving breakfast at 4, and you're there till 9 o'clock at night because they're serving supper all the way up till 9, because you got a mess deck that seats maybe 75 people, and you got to feed 1,900. So, you know, pretty much the cooks were busy all day. I was in the scullery. I ran the scullery and washing the dishes and stuff, and we stayed busy. We stayed busy.
Okay, I'm not Navy. Scullery.
Scullery's, you know, the metal trays you got in boot camp.
Yeah.
Well, that's where we washed the metal trays, emptied the garbage off of them, washed the cups and the silverware, all through these great big huge washing machines. You just put them in a rack and run them through. That's called the scullery.
Okay.
That was not choice duty.
So that's your first ship.
Yes. Second ship, we got.
Just hold on. So now you're on your first ship,
Okay.
and you're going all the way to Cuba.
All the way to Cuba.
Smooth sailing.
Wasn't bad. It wasn't. Matter of fact, it was kind of fun in the Panama Canal because I mean, you seen things that normal people would never see, and then you get in the middle of it in that freshwater lake, and you have a freshwater washdown, and you break out the fire hoses, and everybody's squirting everybody, and I mean, it wasn't that bad of a time. Then you get on the other side. That's when the reality set in when you see the Russian ships outside of Cuba, and we're outside of Cuba, and we're looking at each other, and you know. And even back then, I still didn't realize how close we were to a nuclear confrontation, you know. I mean, I was 17. I'm invincible. You can't, you know.
So at that time, you've been told the Russians are bad.
Yes.
And now you're seeing their ships.
Yeah, and you know, it was never a face-to-face stare you down type thing, but you'd see them a couple hundred yards away over this way, and they'd pass you, and in the night you'd see a couple of them over here, and you'd see them holding flight ops on one of their old carriers and stuff like that, and it was a little eye-opening, to say the least.
So what kind of armament did you have on your ship?
Remember, we were a troop transport. Our primary function was to get the troops to where they were going. We had 40mm, quad 40mm guns, which I think they were around at the end of World War I. This ship was, the ship I was on was actually built in 1936 and commissioned in 37, so, and this was 62. So, been a while.
So the bad guys had the big ships and you weren't.
Yeah, well, we had destroyers there too.
But your ship wasn't.
No. Far from it. One shot would have probably taken us down, you know.
But when you traveled, were you traveling with a group?
Oh yeah, we were in convoy. There was, in our particular convoy, when we left San Diego, there was 4 troop transport, 2 cargo transports, and a support oiler. We all went together. And of course, there was, on the perimeter were the screen ships, the destroyers and the cruisers. Aircraft carrier was already in the Caribbean from the East Coast.
So you had some protection.
Oh yeah. I mean, they got close to us, but you know, it was never training your guns on each other. You just didn't do that back in them days.
So you get to Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
We anchored off the shore a couple of times. Never got liberty, except for one time we pulled into the pier to take on supplies. Had all hands working party, we're bringing on supplies. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they had liberty call. Well, a group of us ended up, we'd never, of course, never been to Gitmo before, and we ended up getting on cattle cars. You know, and I know you're familiar with cattle cars. And that was an experience in itself. And we ended up over at the club, and we had a couple of beers. You know, back then it didn't matter if you were 16 or whatever. If you wore the uniform, they'd serve you beer. Well, somehow or another, we ended up at the Marine Corps Club. There was 7 of us, 7 sailors and probably 400 Marines there, all in uniform. And we had this redhead from Tennessee who decided he was going to build a pyramid of cans. And he did. And some Marine threw a can and knocked it over. And now here, understand, it's 400 to 7. And he's going to jump up wanting to fight. So we're trying to get him to sit because we knew what was going to happen. And pretty soon there's a group of Marines kind of around us a little bit. And well, you know, it's going to happen. And we looked, and there was a group of Marines around that group of Marines. And those particular Marines were Marines off our ship. And they said, if you're going to fight the sailors, you're going to have to fight us too. So nobody fought. Everybody went for a swim.
Okay, so now that's your first ship.
Yes.
You're still in your first enlistment.
Correct.
Which is what, a 3 or 4 years?
4 year.
4-year enlistment.
Actually, it was a 3 years, 11 months, 26 days. I was on a minority enlistment, if you know what that is. You join when you're 17, or at least prior to your 18th birthday. You could have joined the day before you turned 18, and you would get out the day before you're 21, and it would count as a full 4 years. Well, as a matter of fact, I joined 4 days after I was 17, and in 1962, Robert S. McNamara extended everybody 4 months, so I ended up doing 4 years and 3 months on a minority enlistment.
Okay, so you're a cook on a ship.
No, I mess cook. Mess cook.
I'm sorry.
I went back to deck force after that.
Oh, okay. Second ship.
Second ship was an LST out of Yokosuka, Japan.
LST.
That's a landing ship tank, long, flat ship. Carries tanks on. You've seen them in especially in Korean War movies. You see them go running up to the beach. The bow doors open, the ramp comes down, and they offload their cargo. And that was in Yokosuka. We had been on a 9-month Westpac cruise, and every time we pulled into Yokosuka, we'd look over there, and there'd be LSTs sitting there. There was 8 of them, and they never went anywhere. All of a sudden, a message come out. They were looking for volunteers for Land Ship Ron 9, which is the LSTs in Yokosuka. So me and a guy named Ivy out of Texas, we both volunteered. We get back to San Diego after our 9-month Westpac cruise. The second day back, they called us down to the ship's office. We got orders to the USS Tom Green County, LST 1159. Now, these ships, as I said, every time we pulled in, they were sitting there. Well, this was 1963, December of 1963. In January of 1964, we started really loading up Vietnam. Well, guess what? 8 ships were picked to load those Marines from Okinawa and Subic up to Vietnam. So we, in the next 2 years and 5 months, 2 years and 5 months, we spent 97 days in Yokosuka. The rest of it was underway or in a different port.
So you blew the dust off a little bit.
Yeah, we sure did. Yeah, we stayed underway.
So how long were you with that?
2 years and 5 months. That was probably the best 2 years and 5 months of my whole 20. I didn't realize it at the time, you know. I mean, like I say, I reported at sea. I think I was 19. Yeah, I was not. Yeah. I wouldn't have been, no, I was still 18. I wouldn't have been 19 till March of the following year. So you're invincible, you know. I mean, even when you're going up the rivers in Vietnam, flak jacket, who needs a flak jacket? I sit up here and sunbathe, you know, because you're invincible, or so you thought.
So you're in what they would call the brown water, taking the troops in
Correct.
Country.
We spent a lot of time in that river, in that Saigon River, a lot of time. Just anchored out or loading up troops or dropping off troops. Are you familiar with Da Nang?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we spent a lot of time at that LST ramp in Da Nang, loading or offloading. We were involved in an operation up north near July, and we were landing 1st Air Cavalry troops there. We ended up as the shuttle for the hospital ship. They'd bring the casualties down to the LST ramp. We'd load them onto our tank deck and shuttle them out to the hospital ship. That was the most eye-opening, and that's the closest we got to actual battle in country. We were shot at in the river and stuff, but you know, you expected that. But when you're seeing these guys coming right out of the woods, out of the jungle in stretchers, you know, that will make you a believer out of you.
That was a big hospital ship anchored out.
Yeah, with I'd like to say the Mercy, but I'm not sure it was. It might have been the Hope, but she was probably 3 miles offshore. It was still shallow enough to anchor. They had helicopters bringing in. We got the less serious. I mean, but they were still injured. You know, yeah. Yeah, we had a few of them die on the tank deck, but well, you know, that's war.
So you spent a year in Vietnam, or about how long?
Well, of that 2 years and 5 months I was on that ship, I would say close to 15, 16 months of that was up the rivers in Vietnam. And the rest of it was mostly shuttling back and forth. We did have 1 2-month yard period in beautiful downtown Agana, Guam. Real great place yeah, that was fun.
So you're still in your first enlistment.
Yes.
Next ship.
Well, first off, I got out.
Okay.
I went to Treasure Island, got out, stayed out for 87 days, woke up one morning and I said, let me think about this now. I'm making $300 a week.
Treasure Island is?
Treasure Island, California. That was a big debark and embark for Vietnam place in the Navy. And I woke up 87 days later and I was working 3rd shift at a foundry. and I was making $250, $300 a week, which wasn't really bad money back in 1966. But I said, you know, and I'd go to work, and 8 hours later, I'd be totally exhausted. And I said, let me think about this. If I go back to the Navy, they'll give me $4,300 to enlist. And I was E4 at the time. I probably think, you know, I'm going to get me another ship out of Yokosuka, because that was pretty good duty. E4, you were usually the leading gunner's mate on there. Well, the Navy had other ideas. They let me have the $4,300. Then they sent me to ASROC school. Now, understand, I'm a third-class gunner's mate. I didn't even know what ASROC was. It's anti-submarine rocket. So they send me to this school. I went to the school. I did all right. Then there's pro pay involved with that. You get $75 extra a month if you're an ASROC gunner's mate, because ASROC did have nuclear weapon capability, and they give you $75 extra for that. And I said, that's all right. So I went in. Then the next ship was a pre-commissioning USS Richard L. Page out of Newport, Rhode Island. It was being built in the shipyard in Bath, Maine, and commissioned in Boston, and then we home ported in Newport, Rhode Island.
So what did you do while you're waiting for your ship to get there?
Well, we went to firefighting school, and we went to 3M maintenance schools, and we went just school after school after school, just something to keep you busy.
For a guy that didn't like school.
Yeah, I know, and that just, you know, I look back on that even to this day, and I was looking through my record the other day, and of the different schools that the Navy had, I had 27 different schools in 20 years, so, you know. Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned the ship that you were in, Greene County.
Tom Greene County. USS Tom Greene County, LST 1159.
And any close friends on that ship?
Oh, yeah. Well, I still go to reunions for that. Matter of fact, for 10 years, I used to organize the reunions for that thing. We went, our first reunion was 2001. We went to San Angelo, Texas. San Angelo, Texas is a county seat for Tom Greene County, Texas. Real quick story, just for a second here, how I knew for some reason. Now, the first ship I was on was USS Bear, B-E-X-A-R. If you go to Texas, you will see a district in a county called Bear, B-E-X-A-R. And then there's the Bear District. Well, within the Bear District is the Tom Greene County. So I guess I was destined to go to the Tom Greene County. But then, yeah, I did reunions on that ship and everything. My closest friends forever are off that ship. I got a buddy of mine down in Rockford, you know, we talk at least once a week, so, you know, and another one in St. Louis, he came up and helped me open up the cafe and everything. So, yeah, there's a good skipper. We had a great, of all the skippers I had in 20 years, that was the best one I ever seen. He was a big old Texan from Austin, Texas, I believe his name. His name is Burl Troutman. And our first reunion, me and Frenchie, the guy from Rockford, we pull up, park the car, and we're walking across the parking lot, and here comes this great big giant walking towards us. And he walks up and he put his hand out and he says, "Burl Troutman." And I said, "Captain, I'd recognize you anywhere." I said, "The only reason you don't recognize me, there's no podium between us." That means I went to Captain's Mast a couple of times.
Okay, so your Vietnam service, do you have any casualties in your unit at all?
We had one guy was wounded, and then shortly after I left the ship, about 2 months after I left the ship, we took a rocket in the mess decks, and 2 guys were killed and 7 were wounded. That, as far as I know, researching the history of the ship, is the only 2 casualties they had during the Vietnam conflict.
Okay, so now your next ship.
The Richard L. Page, like I say, and then followed that, I went to shore duty in Pax River, Maryland for 2 years. That was the test pilot school in Patuxent River, Maryland, about 60 miles, southeast of D.C. That was a good shore duty.
So did your job change at all, or you still got the same job?
I was on security there,
Okay.
and that was an interesting job. I went from a size 30 waist to a size 34 waist while I was on shore duty, because that was a 3-on, 3-off thing, and the 3 days I was off, I drove cabs. So pretty much I was setting for 2 years, you know.
Okay, so everyday life, what's it like for you on, just, let's say your shore duty?
Well, if I was on my 3 days on, I had to work from 5 to 5, either the 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. shift or the 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift. Then the 3 days off, like I say, I drove cabs, so I would just, whenever I could get a cab, I'd go ahead. And then what would happen is you'd get 3 days of 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then off 3 days, and then when you came back, you would do the 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift, and it kept rotating like that. It was actually, well, you figure I was on shore duty for 2 years, so I only worked for the Navy for 1 year.
Okay, so during that time, you said you're security.
Yes.
Is that an SP, or you?
We were the security on the base. There was no civilian police force. There was no, the Marines had the gate, naturally, and we had everything that happened in the gate. We did all the traffic, all the investigations, anything that happened on board that base. We had housing aboard the base. We had patrol housing. We were the police force.
Law enforcement, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, living conditions, pretty decent on the ship as you're.
As I got further along in my career, they got better. The first ship, we were 5 high in canvas racks. I mean, you know, I was charged with holding reveille one morning, and you know, these racks are 5 high and they're held by chains in between them. So I figured, I'm going to get these guys up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to raise that top rack and drop it down on one chain, and they'll all go boom, 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 and it'll wake them up. Well, just as I picked it up, pushed it up, and was going to drop it onto this other chain, the ship took a roll and the chain came out like that, and 5 guys hit the deck. I spent about half the day running from them. But no, you didn't have no room on those ships at all. The Marines were 7 high in their spaces. And then the Tom Green County, we still had canvas racks, but we had a berthing area that was designed to hold 15 people, and we only had 10 in our division. So we got double, you know, as you progressed up in rank, you got double lockers and pretty much, and then of course, right outside our door, when we carried the 1st Air Cavalry, they made the mistake of parking their geedunk truck. Well, that's what we call it, geedunk truck, because it had all the sea rations. It had the big cans of M&Ms and stuff like that. It was parked right outside our door. So when we went out on the tank deck, all we had to do was open up the door, and there was that truck. Well, they had a Army patrol, you know, that would walk around the tank deck making sure nobody was stealing nothing. We'd get him shooting the breeze on the other side of the tank deck, and somebody would steal all the sea rations. So they...
So are you in your 2nd enlistment now, or?
Yeah, I was in my 2nd enlistment, and then after shore duty, I went to B school in Great Lakes, another school, and that was almost a year, counting the electronics, electricity, and hydraulic portion, and then the B school, which is the advanced training school for gunner's mates. It was 11 months total. And then I went to another pre-commissioned ship. It was the USS Dahlgren, DLG-12. It wasn't new, but it had been taken out of commission, rehabbed, and 2.5 years later was being put back into commission. That was a good ship. That was.
So the first ship you went on was pre-commissioned. Are you a plank?
Plank owner on both the Page and the Dahlgren. Yes. We had a captain named 30 Knot Thorpe, because everywhere he went 30 knots. So.
Is that fast or slow for an Army?
Well, a knot is 1 1/8 mile an hour. So you figure that's about what, 34, 35 miles an hour, somewhere. That's fast for a ship. Yeah, not quite as fast as the aircraft carriers or submarines, but it was fast for them times.
Okay. So what did you do on that ship?
I was a gunner's mate, a ASROC gunner's mate, and that was an easy life, because when you go to a pre-com in the Navy, they take senior people. You might have, well, for one thing, I'll give you an example. On board most ships, E5, all E6s and some E5s go ahead of the chow line because they're the senior people on board the ship. E7s have their own messing area. On this particular ship, nobody got ahead of the chow line because there were so many E6s and E5s aboard that ship. That's what happens when you go into commission. And within a year, a lot of them get transferred. But they want senior people on board there to train the junior people as they come aboard, and then they transfer them off. So in my particular division, there was 26 of us, and 7 of us were E6, which is unusual. I was the senior E6. In my workspace, I had 2 E5s, an E4, and an E3, all with the same code number as mine. Normally aboard ship, you got 2 with the code number. Well, I didn't even have a magazine to store my weapons. All I had were the 8 weapons that were in the launcher and a workshop. And that was it. I mean, I spent a whole med cruise down in the first class mess because there were so many people up there and we were bumping into each other.
So you were on the West Coast, now you're on the East Coast.
I'm on the East Coast the last 16 years.
And you're in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you one thing. The absolute worst liberty in the Westpac is better than the best liberty in the Mediterranean.
Really?
It's a different world over there. They don't, I don't know, you didn't feel comfortable in a lot of the places in the Mediterranean. Italy probably was about the best because they're used to Americans. You went to France, the people, they didn't treat you very well. Spain was all right, but if you got outside of a Navy town, they didn't want nothing to do with it. Yeah, it was different, you know. Gibraltar was terrible. And anywhere, and I hate to say that because they're our biggest ally, but anywhere the British were, they just didn't like Americans. I don't know why.
So when you do a cruise, usually a year?
No, usually 6 to 8 months. Used to be longer, and then there were so many divorces and stuff in the Navy that they kind of shortened it. And now I think they're all limited to 6 months, once every 2 years, most of them. We used to do back-to-back sometimes. We'd come 6 months, stay home for 2, and go another 6 months. So it's 6 to 8 months, and that's it. But still, you're watching your kids grow up in 6 and 8 month increments. You know what I mean? And that's.
So you were married during this time?
Oh yeah, I got married just before I re-enlisted. The day before, no, actually the day after I re-enlisted. So we were married the whole time I was on the East Coast. The last 16 years of my Navy career. I sowed my wild oats in the first 4 years.
Okay, so you're now on the East Coast, and what are some of the ports that you stopped in the Mediterranean?
Gibraltar, Rota, Spain, Lisbon, Portugal, Athens, Greece. I forget the name of that place. Well, there was Istanbul, but there was a place right outside Istanbul that we used to pull into. Italy, we went to Livorno, we went to Vincennes, we went to Genoa, we went to, what's the city with all the canals?
Venice?
Venice. Naples all the time. I mean, we spent a lot of time in Naples. Sicily, we went to Catania Bay and Salerno, Sicily. And probably, I don't know how many people are around today that can say this, but my first med cruise, I pulled Liberty in Tripoli, Libya. This is like a month before Gaddafi took over. And I mean, it wasn't much of a liberty. Believe me, Tripoli, Libya is not the capital of liberty ports in all the world. That's almost as bad as some of the, well, what's that, Cyprus. We pulled into Cyprus one time. That was just absolutely horrible because the Greeks and Turks don't like each other. And the town we pulled into was right near the border, so there was, at night you'd be on the ship and you hear them shooting back and forth every once in a while. How horrible liberty.
So got to see a lot of cultures.
Yeah, a lot of cultures. Yeah, and that's, I'm glad I'm an American. That's all I'll say about that, because it's just different. It's a different world out there.
Okay, so any USO shows?
I had a chance one time to go aboard a carrier. When we were in Vietnam, there was a carrier anchored out quite a ways out, and they were going to take a boat out there. And I believe it was Waylon Jennings had a show. I think it was Waylon. It was some country singer, and we got started out there on the boat. And probably 10 minutes into that boat ride, they turned us around, took us back to the ship. We got underway for Subic Bay, picked up a load of troops, and borrowed back. That was the only chance I ever really had to see a USO show.
Okay, so now you got the second new ship. What was next?
Then I went to shore duty again, I believe. Was that shore? No, and then I went to an LPD for a year.
What's an LPD?
LPD is a landing platform dock. It's got a superstructure. The bottom of the ship, you can load troops out the backside. You can land helicopters on top. It sinks down in the water in the back there. It's a big ship. 450 sailors on there. We had 3-inch 50s on there. Wow. I had a little problem with with the nuclear weapons program at the time, so I dropped out for a year, and that's when that year I went to an LPD, and then
So what was your job when you dropped the nuclear part?
I went to the 3-inch 50s because I'd had experience on that LST with 3-inch 50s. Another school, by the way. They sent me to Dam Neck, Virginia for 6 weeks for a school on 3-inch 50s. By this time, I'd figured out the Navy system, though. You know, I mean, the schools aren't that tough if you have a semi know what you're doing. You know. But yeah, then from that LPD, then I went to shore duty in Groton, Connecticut, submarine base, and I ran the sub-school drop barracks. In other words, if they got dropped from submarine school for any reason, it was my job to interview them, find them a job in the surface Navy, or process them for a discharge, whatever the case may be. Navy at that time had a program called Subfarer, where a kid would enlist in the Navy. He would then go to an A school, then he'd go on to submarines, and if for any reason he was disqualified for submarines at that point, he would be given the option of either a discharge or another add-on school and out to the surface fleet. Well, the Navy were losing so many people because of this by sending them to A school, which is equivalent to about a year's worth of college, and then sending them to submarine school, and here the kid would go underwater and find out he has eustachian tube dysfunction. Now the Navy done spent $200,000 training this guy, and all of a sudden he says, well, I'm going to get out. So from then on, they would come from boot camp straight to sub school, and then they'd find out if they were qualified to submarines and then send them on to A school. But that cost the Navy a lot of money in that 2 years they ran that program.
So basically, you were doing exit interviews.
Yeah, right. But there was, you know, they were dropped for disciplinary reason. They were dropped for medical. We had a kid actually got dropped out of sub school because he had agoraphobia. He was afraid of water. Now, how did he get? Where was this recruiter? He didn't take him down, show him a lake, and says, "This is what you're going to be going on." You know, agoraphobia. My God.
So, then what's next?
Then after that, I went to a reserve tin can out of Philly, one of the best duties I'd ever been on, except that we were always underway on the weekend, but we were in port. We had a reserve destroyer, carries a crew of 2/3 of a crew. The other third is made up by reserves. But when you budget everything in the Navy, if the budget for this ship is based on a full crew. So every 3 months, the cook had a budget, and he would, spend so much. And for some reason, if we didn't have the reserves come aboard, or even if they did, you got to figure they're only on there 1 weekend a month. So that's 3 weekends a month without them. That's like 28 days a month that you're getting extra money for that 1/3 of the crew that is not there. So every 3 months, the cooks would have a steak and shrimp or steak and lobster night for the crew, and your families and everybody come down to the pier, eat steak and lobster on the mess decks. It was great. That was a great ship.
So now we're getting close to the end of your career.
Yeah, and I really didn't want to go to sea again, so there was an opening in a ammunition facility. I was only 36 at the time, but that's old in the Navy, especially when you've been putting, you're in 18 years, or 18 and a half I was in at that point, and of that 18 and a half, 14 of it was at sea on them steel decks and bouncing around and fighting falling out of your rack when the ship's rolling 25, 30 degrees. And so my body was kind of wore out. I really didn't want to go to sea again. And I went to Vieques, Puerto Rico, and ran the ammunition facility down there for 14 months, and then I retired.
Now, many times, the latter part of people's career, they go into instructing or teaching OJT or teaching in classrooms.
Right.
Did you do any of that?
No, I didn't have any opportunity of that. Like I say, I ran that ammunition facility. I had 26 gunners, mates, and AOs that worked for me. And then we had 24 Seabees down there that were building roads. And, I'd never been at a strictly ammunition facility before. So I was kind of learning from the chief warrant officer, who was our commanding officer on that base. And I got to the point where, I would teach the new people coming in, but I never got into a teaching billet per se in the Navy at all. But yet, after the Navy, that's what I did.
Didn't like school, so you joined the Navy, went to all the schools.
Yeah.
Didn't teach, but after work, okay.
Yeah.
So you're moving around a lot,
Yes,
raising a family.
yes.
Strong support from the spouse.
Oh, absolutely. She basically raised our kids. I went on 5 different Mediterranean cruises.
Which would be, at 6 months, is 2.5 years.
Yeah. Just out of that 14 years, and the rest, on that reserve tin can, that was another one. We were home ported in Philly, but if somebody wanted to see something, or an active duty ship couldn't make a commitment down in the Caribbean, we'd go to the Caribbean for a couple of months. We spent a lot of time at sea. And now I won't go on a body of water unless I can see both sides.
So she's raising a family. You've got how many kids while you're in?
3.
3 kids in the Navy.
Well, we actually had 4. We lost 1 to crib death, but we had 3 kids living at home at the time.
So many times you talk to career military, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, strong spouse support.
Absolutely, absolutely. We couldn't have done it on our own. My wife is fantastic. Great cook, great mother. Without her, I would have never been able to do my 20. I knew my kids were taken care of. I go aboard ship, we'd be gone for a couple, 3 months. I didn't have to worry about the kids. She took care of everything. Yeah, and we're still married today. Now, a lot of military people can't say that.
Exactly. Okay, so you get out. Take advantage of the GI Bill at all?
Yeah, I went to Mid-State. I took some courses out there, and then I got a job down in Great Lakes, and I graduated from Gateway Technical with computer electronics. And that was all paid for by the GI Bill.
Okay, so you're now living where?
In Kenosha. I took a job at Great Lakes. My first year I was down there, my daughter was a senior in high school, so my wife and kids stayed up here, and I was commute on the weekends, come home. And then the second year, I bought a house down in Kenosha, and I taught at gun school. The guy that didn't like school, and I taught at gun school. But it's a different world when you're teaching a military school, especially as a civilian. You didn't have duty, number one. You didn't have to be there after 4 o'clock because your day was done. And number two, I look at it this way, you go even to some colleges, but mostly in high school, these kids, a lot of them don't want to be there. But when you're in the military, these kids chose that life. It was an all-volunteer force. They chose to come to that school, and it was an entirely different atmosphere. Every once in a while, you got one in there with an attitude problem, but then you handled it because you got 20 years of experience of handling that stuff,
So what was your highest rank that you...
Well, that's another story. I retired as a gunner's mate first class. I had made chief. I was a selectee for chief while I was down in Puerto Rico. And my detailer called me up and he said, look, he says, I already had my retirement papers in. In 1982, you could pull your retirement papers. You can't do that nowadays. You put them in, you're gone. And he said, look, he says, I really need you to take these. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. You send me a set of orders to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Fleet Training Group, and I'll pull my papers. He says, done. So I thought, okay, finally I'm going to make chief. I'd passed the test forever and ever, but I just never got selected. Well, this time I said, okay, I'm getting ready, So I get a call one day. Now the career counselor down Roosevelt Roads, he heard this whole transaction, that I would pull my papers when in receipt of orders to Gitmo. So I get a call from the career counselor, Rosie Rhodes, and that's 14 miles across the water from us. The LCU would come over, and we'd have 2 trips a day. So he says, you need to come over. He says, I need to talk to you. So I go over there the next day, and he says, here, and he put a set of orders in front of me. It said, USS Eisenhower, pre-com detail. Now understand, in 20 years in the Navy, I'd never even set foot aboard an aircraft carrier, much less get stationed on one. And I know what a chief gunner's mate does aboard an aircraft carrier. He either runs magazines or he runs the magazine sprinkler systems, which I had no desire to do. So I call up the detailer. The career counselor's right on the other phone. And this detailer, I said, he was senior chief. I said, senior chief, I said, you sent me in a set of orders to the Eisenhower. He said, that's right. He said, I need you there. I said, our agreement was that you would send me to Gitmo. He says, you're going to have to complete that Eisenhower tour first. And I said, no, I don't. I says, if you remember correctly, I did not pull my retirement papers. Well, he says, you got to. You're in receipt of orders. I said, no, I don't. And the career counselor, who was an E9, which is one more than the senior chief, said, no, he doesn't. He does not have to pull. So I made my decision. I said, okay, let me have overnight to think about it, and I'll make a... And I weighed things against each other. Well, if I stayed for another 2 years, my retirement pay would be $75 more a month when I retired. I already had plans to go to school when I got out. I had my family right here in Wisconsin Rapids. I called them up the next day. I said, I'm not pulling my papers. And I went ahead and retired 33 days later as a gunner's mate, first class. So.
Okay, 20 years in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
What lessons did you learn during that career that served you well in civilian life?
Whew, wow, that's a tough question. There's a lot of lessons learned. You got to remember, I went in there as a 17-year-old street kid, and when I got out, I was going on my 38th birthday. So I learned basically how to be a man, I guess. That was about the best thing. You couldn't, when I was a street kid, you I'm not saying I did what I wanted when I was in the Navy, but I learned quickly that there were places to do things and places you didn't do things. And I guess just learning how to be a responsible person instead of just a kid that went in at 17 years old. And I learned a lot about, veterans benefits, etc., stuff like that, which served me later a lot.
So, would you recommend the Navy to anybody?
I would recommend the military of any kind, any one of them. I'm partial to the Navy naturally, but the Army, my son put 22 years in the Army. He went all the way from E1 to E9, 22 years. My other son put 27 years in the Navy. He went from E1 to 03. So, you know, I think the military, I firmly believe that it should be mandatory. A 2-year enlistment should be mandatory, but, you know, who am I?
Okay, you mentioned the VA. You use the VA for your health care.
Yes, I do.
Comfortable with it?
Yes, I am. I think we're fortunate up here because we've got a good CBOC, but you know, there's horror stories in the VA too. Phoenix, Arizona, for instance. You know, I can't say even Toma. You know, I mean, Toma's got a bad reputation. I've never had any problems at Toma, except for that one dentist. But that's another story. That wasn't Toma's fault.
Right. Okay. VFW.
VFW.
You're a member of different military organizations?
Yes, I'm the
Veterans organizations, I'm sorry.
So, yes, I'm service officer at the VFW. I'm the vice president of the VVA. I'm a life member of the DAV, and I am the founder and owner and operator of the American Heroes Cafe, Central Wisconsin.
As service officer for the VFW, if a veteran has an issue,
He can come to me.
he could come to you at the American Heroes Cafe.
Absolutely, anytime at all. I mean, I got right on my business card that I'm the service officer. Now, I necessarily won't be able to help him fill out his claim because they've taken that away from us, but I can turn him on to the people that can help him with his claim, or if he has any issues with the VA. For instance, recently we've had some that have had difficulty getting appointments. I managed to get them a couple of appointments and stuff like that. If there's any issue they have, they can come to me. If I can't help them, I can find somebody that will.
American Heroes Cafe. You're the number 2 in Wisconsin?
Yes, we're the second one of 5. There's 5 of them now. Number 1 was Kenosha.
Yeah.
When I was working down at Great Lakes, I used to go to the American Heroes Cafe in Kenosha at the Festival of Foods. There's 2 ladies run that. Both of them were involved with the Milwaukee honor flight, and one of them, her dad died just prior to the flight, so she wanted to do something. So the 2 of them got together and they started this American Heroes Cafe. I used to go on Friday mornings whenever I could, and I told them, I says, when I retire, if I ever move back up north, I'm gonna start one up there. And I retired, and I moved back up north, and I started one here.
There's some more in Wisconsin.
Yeah, there's just about every festival of food that's opened up in the last 2 years has a Heroes Cafe. As a matter of fact, I heard from the lady in Kenosha that the new general manager of Festival of Foods has told his people that every time a new festival of food opens up in the state of Wisconsin, there will be an American Heroes Cafe in that Festival of Foods. American Heroes Cafe there, they, of course, they got, you know, their donuts and coffee right there. We have to bring it in over here, but those 2 ladies in Kenosha came up and cut the ribbon on mine up here. That was great. I went from 30, 40 people a week. We're up to 120 now. So.
And you've had 2 Medal of Honor recipients.
Yes, that was a. You know, we've had politicians, we've had the mayor, we've had other VIPs, etc. But the highlight of the American Heroes Cafe Central Wisconsin so far was when Gary Wetzel was here and when Ken Stump was here. 2 Medal of Honor recipients, the only 2 living Medal of Honor recipients from the state of Wisconsin.
Bill, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks a lot.
No problem. And thank you very much for watching.